My name is Mike Honey. I'm a former Heritage Chair. I teach ethnic and labor studies and American history in Tacoma. We're having a panel, and I'm going to just go quickly so that we can get really rolling. So on the panel, we have Mark McDermott, a labor educator for 25 years, senior policy staff person in state, local, and federal government. Besides government service, has done a lot of union activism and community organizing, and conducts educational workshops. We've had him at the Pacific Northwest Labor History Association. I know he does great presentations. Then we have Rich Stahls, Executive Director of One America. Or do we have Rich? Is he here? I guess he's not here. Okay, I don't see a Rich. We have Catherine Venables, correct? Student organizer, United Students Against Sweatshops at UW. She's an undergraduate public health major, comes from a strong union family, works as a student organizer in U.S. Students Against Sweatshops, and has helped to take control of the University of Washington's multi-million-dollar contracts with huge corporations that exploit garment workers in developing countries. We're all, yay, yeah. Sometimes it takes a group with leverage to take control of an issue, and the students at UW have really done that. The university can't sell all this paraphernalia if people won't buy it, and they have a pressure point, and they're using it. So we've got all that, and then we've got one more person that I don't have the news for, is Dean McGrath, ILW Local 23, I'm sorry. And maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit when you do it. Did I miss somebody? Yes.
Kim Voss.
Oh, yes, Kim Voss. I'm sorry. Sociology, University of California, Berkeley. And I have her on here also. Kim's a leading scholar, organizer, immigrants' right campaigner, labor historian. Her books include Rallying for Immigrant Rights, The Fight for Inclusion in 21st Century America, a book that a lot of us use called Hard Work, Remaking the Labor Movement. Another one, Rebuilding Labor Organizing and Organizers in the New Union Movement with Ruth Milkman. And a book on the Knights of Labor and Class Formation in the 19th century. So very extensive scholarship, but also very extensive activism and organizing and fighting for labor rights. So our topic here is sort of multiple, building alliances across movements. So some questions I'll pose. Hopefully each person can talk for about 10 minutes. And I think really important in this panel is to open it up for questions. Probably our best way of really addressing these questions. So one question, you might think about this while you're hearing the presentations. How can community, identity, and labor organizations work together to build alliances? In other words, we're talking about beyond the scope of unions, identity groups, community groups of all kinds. How can we build alliances? This is obviously very important on the $15 minimum wage campaign, among many others. What are the barriers that prevent that? And how can those barriers be overcome? Third, are there demographic changes in Seattle and in this area that actually are opportunities for building these alliances? I think that there are. Four, how can the problems facing workers today be made visible to other groups who are working on their own sets of issues, be they LGBT, women's rights, environmental, anti-racist groups? How can we highlight labor as part of all of those struggles? Oftentimes labor gets seen as, quote, a special interest, kind of put to the side. Actually, that's not what we want. We want an identification of labor rights and labor movement as part of everything else that's going on. And how about any recent campaigns? Have we seen some evidence of change or progress or hope through recent campaigns? And then maybe most importantly, and maybe we could start with this one, what experiences or perspectives have the individuals on the panel gained on these kinds of issues. So, those are a lot of questions. People have some prepared remarks. Maybe one way to start is introducing yourself a little bit and your own experience, and then address some of the issues. And I'll try to give you a wave after about 10 minutes so that we have enough time to get everybody in the audience involved. Sound okay? So I guess we'll just go in the order of the people at the table.
Okay, stand.
Yeah, maybe standing is good because of people in the back, and I'll give you this microphone.
All right, I can stand. I'm not too tall. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. My name is Catherine. I'm a student organizer with United Students Against Sweatshops here on campus. I come from a Teamster family. My mom, especially, is a very strong Teamster, very active in her union. I joined USAS last year. For anyone that's not familiar with the work that USAS does, we're an affiliate of a national student organization that organizes strategic campaigns in solidarity with elected union leadership on the UW campus and the greater Seattle community, and with workers producing Husky apparel around the world. This might come as a shock to some administrators that I know, but believe it or not, the university belongs to students. It operates for the students, and without the students, there would be no university. And using our leverage as the stakeholders in this university, we're able to influence decision-making around multi-million-dollar contracts with corporate giants that are exploiting workers to make our Husky apparel. Time and time again, UW-USAS, has rallied student voices to speak along with other communities whose voices aren't always heard. We operate under the radical notion that our social movements are most effective when they're led by the people most affected by them, and thus our group is bound into the idea of collective liberation. Aboriginal elder Lilla Watson once said, "If you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." And that really encompasses what we do. We work in empowerment and solidarity. And as it turns out, this works. Over the last couple of years, we've brought brands such as Nike, Adidas, and Russell Athletics to their knees, forcing them to have a conscience and respect their workers. And they're afraid of us because we don't lose. USAS has never lost a campaign. And we do this by building those alliances that are so critical to our success. As a student at the university, I don't know what it's like to be a garment worker in Honduras. I don't know what it's like to be a custodial worker at the University of Washington. But I do know what it's like to have my voice dismissed because I'm just a student. And using that, I am able to act in solidarity with workers around the world, everywhere from our campus to around the world. I do know that by building student power, we can support those whose voices have been stolen from them. The word solidarity is thrown out a lot, but to me, to USAS, it means supporting those who don't yet realize that they have that power. When garment workers in Bangladesh, for example, reach out to us and say, "Hey, we need help," then we're there, but it's their voice that's being heard. Hearing worker testimonials about sexual harassment, blatant racism, and other forms of discrimination is why USAS fights. Labor as a movement will never progress until we intentionally invest in the leadership of those for whom workplace oppression disproportionately affects, including women, people of color, LGBT communities, and other marginalized identities. And we do so by building the alliances that are so critical to our success. Because if one of us is oppressed, then we're all oppressed. This year, UW-USAS successfully ran a campaign to change the UW Code of Conduct so that every collegiate licensee is required to sign on to the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh, which is a legally binding document that holds brands accountable for the safety conditions in their factories. Yet, as of 2 days ago, the university continues to refuse to cut the contract with JanSport and their parent company, VF Corporation, who happens to be the biggest producer of collegiate apparel in Bangladesh. This is a big issue, and this is happening. The most recent refusal comes on the one-year anniversary of the Rana Plaza building collapse, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. It was the single most devastating factory disaster in the history of the garment industry, killing 1,200 people in one fell swoop and left survivors in the rubble for 17 days after this collapse. Until this last domino has fallen, workers in Bangladesh will not be protected. But without the support of community members and students across the campus, this fight will be a whole lot harder. I would hate to see Husky apparel in the rubble of the next great factory disaster, because I care about this university. I care about the the image that it sets forth, and I care about the workers in those factories that are making these clothes for us. It's only in building these coalitions and these relationships with people that we can make that happen. Thank you.
So I didn't really introduce Dean McGrath because I didn't have any information, but I can tell you Local 23 of ILWU has been really a mainstay in the Harry Bridges Center. And the ILWU in all of its locals has been tremendous power on the Pacific Northwest. One of the unions that really maintains the idea of worker solidarity. I was just reading about a big fight that they were leading to protest the murder of Honduran trade union leaders. And the union has, fought against South African apartheid and fought against repression in various Central American countries. And it really puts its money where its mouth is. So please welcome Dean McGrath.
Before I finish the introduction, I just want to let you know. Yeah, and I'm not going to stand because I'm not as good as her as following notes, that I don't have a PowerPoint, and I want to follow along. That's... Hello, does everyone see me here? Thank you. I've got a plan. I'd like to stay on it, please. Dean McGrath, I got no... you didn't hurt my feelings with the introduction. I'm the new guy, president down there in Local 23, so no hard feelings there. I'd also like to say, before I speak a little bit, I'd like to thank you guys all for being here. This is really what it boils down to, is what we are going to do, and that includes all of you. And if we don't think like that, then it's over. We're going to lose. It's not about what I can do, what he can do, and the President of the United States, whoever. It really boils down to what you guys are going to do and our choices that we make. And I thank you for being here. That show, you could be at home doing YouTube or whatever. You're here. This isn't, fun by any means. You guys are taking care of business and participating, so thank you there. He said earlier, I'm part of the ILWU, and for those who aren't familiar, we load and unload the ships on the west coast of the United States. We're a pretty militant movement with a lot of belief in social principles, want to take care of people. That either makes us extremely loved or extremely hated, and I wouldn't want to be any other way. As I was getting ready for this last night, I'm going to talk to you guys a little about international solidarity. And ironically, as I was opening, I was going over some of our principles, our 10 guiding principles, because it relates, it's really important. But in addition, I was here to talk about solidarity and international solidarity, and I got the pleasure to be the guy that really got to help someone out last night. I got a call from the ITF, and what they are, they're an international organization that goes on ships and makes sure that all the paperwork is right, and some of the mates on these ships go through unbelievable, we talk about a global world. What's going on in the globe is downright scary. These guys, 6 months, they don't get paid. So the crew last night hadn't been paid. The captain made assurances for them to get paid. She's on the ship, and he's giving her the runaround. And I had the kids last night, so I couldn't go down there. And I said, put the phone up by the captain. I can't get down there, but... So she's got the phone, and he's, no cell phones, no cell phones. And, Captain, we can talk about this now, or we can talk about it tomorrow when you're supposed to be working the ship. So you do what you say, or we'll discuss it then. It's up to you. And why I bring that to you is because if we don't treat each other with the same amount of respect that we treat our own organizations, it's no skin off my back. That ship comes and my guys work. But there are going to be times when I don't get to be the bigger dog, and I'm going to rely on other unions, other people, and the public for that matter, which is why I think we have survived as a union for so long in an age where obviously unions are not looked upon with the respect that they deserve. Now, it's almost, it's like a dirty word now. And it's ingrained in all of us just through the media and whatnot. I have to, there's times when I even introduce myself, it's like, yeah, I'm with the ILW. Depending where I'm at. Because I'm either, like I said, respected greatly for those of us that understand unionism, or those guys, But that's okay. And I think that we need to embrace that, and we have no problem doing that. But really rely on all of the other organizations and why solidarity is so important to us. I'll go in and touch on a couple of points or a couple of the founding principles. As I was thinking about this, I try to get creative and try to, how can we do this? How can we beat this? And it really comes down to this. It's the same old fight that's always been. It's, in my eyes, and what would that be? Does anyone have a suggestion? What's the oldest fight in the book? The haves and the have-nots. That's all it comes down to. So we can dress it up and you can hear it talked about in many complicated ways, but it really boils down to capital versus labor. So, I have to check myself regularly and not get caught up in that stuff, get back to the ground and know, and we're in some scary times for labor. I have to also remind myself not to be scared, because we've gone through horrible fights in the past and we've came out. So as we touched upon earlier, yeah, it's pretty ugly right now. If we stick together, we go back to what's worked in the past, and I think solidarity and unity is key to that. We'll get through these struggles, but again, it's going to come down to you. It's going to come down to all of us together doing that as a collective. That's our core principle. Is a union is built on its membership. Strength and understanding of unity of membership can determine their own needs. So I would ask you, as I say a couple of these, not just to think of it as a union, but as it applies to whatever organizations you're a part of and society. We are built on what is supposed to be a democratic society, where all of our individual wills together make those decisions. Now, as he pointed out earlier, that's being devastated, that principle. We really need to remind ourselves that it's key to go back to what's worked in the past. And I would say to any of the leaders, Harry Bridges, who this is founded off of, this chair, he made a crucial distinction when he was president that he would never make more money than the others, any of his workers. And I think that really, he had some great wisdom, because it's easy, I can say, good Lord, I'm working 12-hour days, get calls nonstop, I deserve more, right? He made that principle, that notion, ingrained it so that he would become stumble-proof in the future. Because a lot of us we separate in leadership roles, we separate ourselves from who we're representing, and I think it's happened over the last decades that we've moved across from being who we are about. And I just think that's an important principle that we always have to, who do you represent? Who are you? And we need to continue to reach back upon that. Labor unity always being the key in our decisions. There's been a lot of infighting between unions in the last few years because we're on our heels. 7% in non-private sector, 7%, private sector, so take the public jobs out of it, we're down to 7%. And I think we need to take a look at ourselves and not fight over scraps and get tugged into these wars, because when we do, it's exactly what they want. They got us on their heels, and they can finish us off by throwing a stake out to one and see who's left. Then we're down to 5%, so on. You see the case. Another thing, and it works perfectly with what we're talking about here, is workers are indivisible. So as really, we got to think globally, because they're thinking globally. The employers right now what are they doing? It's ironic. It's laughable. They're unionizing. But they're unionizing with dollars, right? They don't sign a pledge card. They're now an alliance of some sort. I love the Citizens United, things like that. They call it the opposite of what it is, and then throw money at it until they're a monster and we can't fight them. They learned a trick from us. I think someone really, like Karl Roves, and sat back and said, damn, why are these people successful? Well, they unionized. So that now we got the corporations unionizing, and they're kind of kicking our butts right now. It's important that we got to reunionize amongst ourselves and not allow ourselves the inner problems that we can cause. I was going to go on a couple other things, but you're going to ask some questions. So I would just say, as we look to move into the future, how important international solidarity is. Another great example, coincidental, Hong Kong dockers came to town, or they came to the West Coast to show appreciation to the ILWU for the support that we gave them. So they were on a tour, and I got to meet a couple of brothers last week. And when I talk about what exists in the global market, we went over there, and so did Australia. Several unions from around the world and showed up because they were getting just hammered in their contract negotiation, and they were getting replaced. And with our support and support of other workers, international organizations, they got a contract, and they got some what they thought were great things. What they thought were great things, it made my jaw drop. They got clean drinking water. Now they're doing the same job that I'm doing, and they're working for the same employers that I'm working for. So, oh, they could never do that. They are doing it. Clean drinking water, 12-hour, the equipment drivers who drive the cranes, 12-hour shifts, and now they have the ability to take a lunch break. Woo, good for them. They're happy kind of about this. That's progress, and that's what we all got to do. You know, they're progressing, and we can only get in their fight so much. But as an eye-opener, I won't say what I want to say about it. They actually, in those machines, had a window that was in the machine that they threw out, and you can figure out what it is. They weren't allowed bathroom breaks, so you put 2 and 2 together to go out, and they had to eat in the same machine. Those are the kind of things that are going on around the world. So when we get a chance to help those guys out, you know, there'll be times when they'll help. Those guys, too, also said they know our contract's coming up in July. So even where they're at, they let us know that Docker solidarity is important. When they said, well, if the time comes, you know we're there. And I can't even begin to ask those guys for help. But what an amazing notion that they feel that solidarity. And just to give you guys a couple of examples how successful we've been through international solidarity, there's been several examples of when a ship is loaded by scab labor and a government is in full support. Well, sometimes we lose and we can't win that battle here. But those ships got to go somewhere else. And if we have allies and people we can rely on, a perfect example was the Neptune Jade in the late 90s. This ship just bounced around to different parts of the world, and it only had like 7 containers on it until it went back to where it originated because everybody said, we're not touching it. That's how key that international solidarity is. And we've been successful, and we've had a long history of reaching out to other unions, other people, and need to continue to do that as we enter this global market. So, thank you.
I grew up a poor kid who got an opportunity to go to college because people before me fought to open up higher education. In May of 1982, I was a journeyman machinist, still working on the tools, and I was an elected union leader. And on a Friday morning, our owner brought us all into the largest room in the plant and fired every one of us on no notice. By 2:30, every one of us had had our toolbox searched by armed guards. They forced us to lock them, wrapped duct tape around them, and walked us out into the parking lot and said, see you later. This was completely legal under U.S. law. I spent 15 months out of work, lost 6 years on my pension, exhausted my unemployment benefits, and the next job I took a 55% pay cut. And I swore that day I'd never shut up and stop fighting for working people until I lost my mind or they put me 6 feet under. That's who's talking to you today. Okay? Since I retired, I decided I was going to go out and talk to working people all over the country. And in the past 2.5 years, I've given 130 speeches and workshops to working people from San Diego to Vancouver, British Columbia, to Milwaukee, Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Miami, Florida, talking to union organizations at the national, regional, state, and local levels, but also a wide range of community-based organizations to talk about what do we do? What do we do to take back our country and restore our dreams that we can have a more hopeful and prosperous future for all of us where there is once again justice in our country? And I got good news to report because no matter where I go, working people and their allies want to talk about this. And what do they want to talk about? They want to talk about their economic pain and what is being done to their families, to the young people they love, and to their communities in very personal and real terms so that it reaches deep into their hearts and engages them. They want to regain hope that people like them can actually take our country back. And a critical part of that is talking about our history as a diverse working class, and our allies in the past have risen up before and actually shifted the direction of history, and that if our ancestors could do it, so can we. But without that hope, we're doomed. And when I bring that history to people, the audience gets riled up, as Brother Larry Brown from the Machinists and other folks and folks from the building trades and SPIA and other groups have seen. The audiences get riled up. Their hearts are open, their minds open up, and then we begin the discussion of what do we do. They need to understand clearly the origins and the strategies of the class warfare of corporate America to smash the dreams that so many of us have. And we may think that everybody knows this, but they really don't. People are stunned when you lay out to them, this is how they're doing it, this is how it works, and this is a conscious, decades-long strategy. And then the conversation begins to shift to, how do we build the power that we need, and how do we build the coalitions across movements and across our extraordinary diversity in this country so that we can build the power that we need to take it back? And another critical part of that is the fundamental question that I'm pushing people to, and depending on the audience, whether they're leadership or activists or just rank and file folks or regular old community folks, is to get at the question, what is our long-term strategy to take our country back? There's a lot of work at the tactical level, various kinds of movements, and various speakers are going to talk about those, but the larger question of corporate America has been taking our country away from us now for more than 35 years. They've had a plan since the 1970s, and our side needs to build that plan. And we can't depend on the Democratic Party to do that for us. If we do, we're being played for fools. It's not like we don't need them, but by God, they're not going to lead the fight. And that's pretty clear, as we can see by what happened with the Boeing machinists, or not the Boeing machinists, the 751 machinists, when in 3 days, Boeing can walk in and get $8.7 billion in tax breaks. And then the governor turns around and says, why don't you give up your defined benefit pension, which you were the leaders in this state to actually help provide economic long-term retirement security, and say, give it up. Give it up to a corporation that has record profits. This is not leadership. This is capitulation to corporate power. Okay? So in these conversations that I've been leading across the country, here's some of the things that come up that I think are truly profound and are relevant to these discussions. One is the critical importance to talk to people's hearts first. Get them in touch with their own pain, of their own families, of the young people that they love and care about, and how those dreams are being shattered and distorted and twisted and crushed. Because once they get involved with their hearts, their minds open up to a set of conversations that are more difficult to have. There is a deep set of hopelessness, a deep sense of hopelessness, but a deep sense of anger of what is being done. Because one of the critical parts of being hopeless is to be ignorant of your own history. And as I lay out the history of working people and their fights to build a better future, the vast majority of the audiences are largely ignorant. Not they're stupid, but they are ignorant. And what I point out to them, your history has been stolen from you. And the reason your history has been stolen from you, and the reason that it's so important, is that if you don't know that people like you helped change the course of history once upon a time, what makes you think you can do it now? Okay? So reclaiming history just isn't an interesting exercise. It is about people gaining a sense of, we can actually turn this around and not be victims. I was victimized once upon a time, but I refuse to be a victim. There are too many people in the United States who have been victimized, who are stuck in a victim mode, and we have to help liberate them with stories of hope based on our own history. And in doing so, then people start the discussion of who do we unite with. And one of the exercises that I use is called the blame game. We start out by getting the audience to identify who are all the groups that are allegedly responsible for why America is so screwed up today. And then we're going to rank them in terms of which have a lot of power, which have a little power, which have virtually no power. And we end up with about 18 groups with little or no power. They're all the people of color. They're the immigrants. They're the working class people, the poor folks, the homeless, gays and lesbians, et cetera. And then we got a few groups like the hedge fund managers and the corporate media, et cetera, who are on the top. And then we kind of reflect on, how is it that the groups that have no power are the ones that have completely screwed it up? And people are going, well, they're lying to us. I said, yeah, they're lying to us. And then from there, we move into a conversation of who are our allies currently and who should our allies be, and on what basis should we unite. And we've used these in these workshops in different places. These methods work because people's hearts are open, they feel their pain, it's a space where they're sharing that pain with other people. They realize that they're not alone, it's not their fault, and that there's a way out of it because people like us have done it before, we can do it again, but we got to find our allies and come together across all of our diversity and across all of the barriers that are used to divide and conquer us. And I'm here to tell you that we need more people out stimulating these kind of conversations in the grassroots because people are hungry for change, they're hungry for hope, and part of our job is to say, we can do this. Thank you very, very much.
So I thanked everybody. Is it on? Yeah. It's really great to be here. And I'm going to have a somewhat different kind of a talk. I'm primarily a researcher, and I'm going to address one of the problems for this panel, but Michael changed it slightly when he read it to you. So I'm going to give it to you up there. The question I'm going to address is, are there recent or ongoing demographic changes creating new opportunities for building solidarity across labor and other social justice organizations? But I'm not going to do it about Washington State. I'm here from California, and I'm hoping that there are lessons in California that will at least inform. I'm learning a lot about Washington today, but I'm hoping you can learn a little bit about California, and that will be useful to you. My specific question that I've been researching over the last couple of years, and I've been doing this with one of my graduate students and several of my undergraduates, is how has large-scale immigration shaped worker identities in California? And I come to that question in part because if we look around at what's been happening over the last 20 years, we see that the fastest growing part of the American population is recent immigrants and their children, and that this is profoundly changing sort of the racial and ethnic makeup of the United States, and certainly the way that we've understood politics in the United States. Yet we don't really know enough about how that's happening because we don't really know how immigrants think about the kind of traditional dividing lines and their own place in American hierarchy and how they think about hierarchy in general. And we don't know how native-born workers themselves are changing how they think about it in the wake of large-scale immigration. So I come to this question as really a scholar of labor, not a scholar of immigration. And the thing that made me really, I was one of the people who looked at, my whole academic career has been spent studying the labor movement. I was one of the people who talked about when the labor movement started to change. I, like many people in this room, was very happy, for example, when the AFL-CIO changed its policy about organizing immigrant workers. But I was very depressed when, in 2008, Roger Waldinger published a survey where he showed that the title sort of says it all, will the followers be led, in which he showed that they're on the ground of rank-and-file workers in the United States and of union members in particular, that there was really not that much support for that policy change. So that made me wonder what's going on the ground. I think because we don't understand what's going on the ground, we don't really know where the opportunities are for unions and NGOs to challenge growing inequality in America. The second inspiration for me was a book that was published in 2000 by Michelle Lamont, which looked at how black and white workers thought about themselves and each other. And the thing that was really nice about this study is that when she looked to see how workers understand themselves and others, she took culture and morality into account. And her study was done of New Jersey and New York in the early, she did interviews in the early 1990s. And it was a pretty depressing story in reality because when she talked to workers, she found that white workers talked really a language that was focused on sort of discipline and hard work, and that's how they evaluated themselves, found their own sense of self-worth. And that when she talked to African American workers, that they spoke more a language that emphasized solidarity and caring, and she called that the caring self. And that when they thought about those above and those below, this kind of shaped how they not only thought about each other, but how they thought about class in America, that white workers drew very fuzzy boundaries between themselves and those above, pretty sharp boundaries between themselves and those below. African American workers drew less boundaries between themselves and those below. Most of them did not draw that many boundaries between those and those above, but those who did drew sharper than the white workers. And she asked them about immigrant workers, and largely they were just indifferent to immigrant workers. So I set out to study, using that same set of questions, adding a few more, what workers in California think now. I looked at white and Latino workers. And I just want to put that in perspective in terms of what's been happening with immigrant history. And we see here the percent of foreign born between 1900 and 2011. And you can see the yellow line is the US, the blue line is California. California's always had more immigrants than the rest of the United States. But if you look at the curve in the recent years, you see that the rest of the US is sort of following. And then, just so we can, one more slide here. If we look at the immigrants as a share of the workforce in the US, it's 16%, and in Washington state, it's almost exactly that, it's 16.5%. In California, it's 35%, double that. Okay, so as I've already said, I like the study I built on. I used the same set of questions. I used open-ended interviews. I'm not going to talk now about my sampling strategy. You can ask me about that later if you would like. The important thing to know here is that my definition of who we would talk to were full-time workers, and we defined working class, as had Lamont, by those who did not have a college education. I've only talked to people in the 9-county Bay Area, but those 9 counties, we think of the Bay Area as all the liberal kind of la-la land, I guess. But in reality, there's vast differences in these 9 counties, both demographically and in terms of politics. Okay, I've done 78 interviews, myself and my undergraduates and my graduate students, 40 with Latino workers, 38 with native-born white workers. And so we're not finished yet, but I'm just going to show you what we're finding. Okay, so when Lamont talked to her workers, the one thing that they shared in common, both black and white workers, was when they narrated their life was their emphasis on struggle. The people we talked to, they shared much more in common. They definitely talked about struggle, but in addition, they really emphasized self-reliance and hard work, and both how they understood what made their life worthwhile and how they drew boundaries against others. And you guys can all read the quotes up here on the board behind me. You can see in both of these the importance of those two themes. You can also see in the second quote the way in which hard work provides this sharp sort of boundaries that workers draw between themselves and others, right? So she's talking about the lazies, etc. And I could multiply these quotes a million times over, but I won't. The thing that I conclude from this is that the people we talked to, in Lamont's terms, all emphasized the disciplined self that was fundamental to how they understood themselves and each other, and how they evaluated, that's key, each other. However, the opportunity to have a college degree was also shaped their evaluations of selves. The Latino workers we talked to really felt bitterly their inability to have an education. They put great hopes on what would happen with their children. The white workers did not talk a language of obstacles. Instead, they talked a language of choice, that they had chosen a different path. And this was true even for workers who grew up in terrible conditions. They still narrated it as a choice. And they also articulated a notion of a good life that did not depend upon a college education. Most of the people we talked to identify themselves as working class, not all, but many of them do, and all believe that class divides the United States. Whites believe, though, the way that they thought about those above shared a lot in common, but also had some differences. When whites talked about those above, they criticized them for using problematic shortcuts to get where they are. They criticized them for using connections to get where they are, and they talked about their using unfair advantages to get ahead. They were very skeptical that greater education equaled greater skills. They criticized the weak work ethic and sense of entitlement of those above, and they criticized greed, big business mindset, their corporate mindset. And this was a theme that you never see when you look at the surveys about inequality and what people think about it, is they talked a lot about the ways in which those above screwed with their lives unthinkingly. And here you can see two quotes that demonstrate that. The first is by a white worker who talks about a boss he had who had a frat boy attitude, and that has led to the way that he treats people. And the second quote is by a white construction worker that again talks about big business mindset, the problems that happens when they interfere with this worker and his colleagues' lives. When Latinos criticized those above, they had a somewhat different criticism. They did not focus on the undeserved privilege. In fact, they admire people who take advantage of the opportunities they have. But they did express unprompted great critique of inequality in the United States. They also expressed disapproval and of the greed of the upper class, and emphasize the responsibility of the rich to help the poor, which they believe they do not do. And here are two quotes there that show that, both from a Latino construction worker and from a Latina janitor, talking about how the rich only look out for themselves. When they talk about those below, the majority of Latinos expressed solidarity with the poor, but it was very circumscribed solidarity, mainly for children, for the sick, for recent immigrants. White workers did not draw that sharp of boundaries. They just rarely discussed the poor, even when probed. But the one place in which they both drew very sharp boundaries was against people on public assistance. Latinos did that because they felt like that showed that people had not taken advantage of the opportunities they had. Whites made a distinction between the deserving and undeserving poor. And some had even been on public assistance themselves and criticized themselves for when they had been. Okay, so, and then if we look at racial boundaries very quickly, and here the contrast was quite extreme with the study done in the early 1990s before immigration was so great. Latinos rather than African Americans were the most salient group for white workers. Many, especially blue-collar workers, see Latino immigrants as a threat to their livelihoods and sometimes to their perception of themselves as skilled workers. They critique them for breaking down union standards, but they consistently praise them for their work ethic. And maybe I'll just read this quote because I think it really sums up well what we heard. Latino immigrants are coming into the construction industry and breaking the union down. But they are hungry right now, and a hungry person will do a lot of things, and I can't blame them. I see immigrant workers more as a desperation. They will take the worst jobs, put up with a lot more, because they are desperate. It's not their fault or my fault, it's just how it is. They were born in Mexico or wherever they were born, and they come here and they have to make their way, and I suppose I would be doing the same thing if I were born here. Whatever I had to do to make it, I'd do it. I feel like it's not the immigrants' fault. It's not their fault. And we see him constantly saying this, and we could see the people we talked to, they would make a critique and then they would immediately, but it's not their fault or they really work hard. Okay. In contrast, the study we're comparing it with, their Lamont's white interviewees never expressed any positive views about African Americans, the most salient group they compared themselves to. Even those who were anti-racist talked about sort of every human being deserves God's love, but it was not about anything specific. Given the importance that they place on hard work and self-reliance, our white interviewees did not draw boundaries against, even then did not draw boundaries against Latinos for weak worker solidarity. When they were critical, they mentioned other things: illegal border crossing, use of fake documents, not paying taxes, sending money abroad, endangering others by bypassing safety regulations on the work site. But then they would come back to the hard work trope. For our Latinos, whites were the most salient group. Whites, they used the term whites and Americans interchangeably. Whites were perceived as capable, disciplined, orderly, and rule-abiding, yet they were also quick to say that those positive traits did not make them superior to Latinos, and they were quick to say that because they do feel that many whites look down on them. And here's a quote that demonstrates that. Americans are great because they made this country, but we're smart too, and they don't recognize that. Latinos, in some ways, thought they were superior. They thought they were warmer and more open, that they take care of the elderly. And as the mother of two 20-year-olds, I will say that one thing that they constantly, was very impressive to me, they constantly talked about how whites push their children out at adulthood. And this was something they didn't do. They criticized whites for wasting their many opportunities, for their weak work ethic, and their being able to rely on the government. They often extend those sorts of critiques for making arguments about why undocumented immigrants are deserving of membership in the U.S. And so also another very positive thing is that we had many workers who expressed a multicultural ethic, which in the earlier study, nobody did. This was seen as only something in the university, but both our Latino and white workers did. Okay, so here's my preliminary conclusions. Mental maps may be changing along with the nation's ethnic and racial landscape. That the construction of class boundaries differs in significant ways in our study from those uncovered two decades ago by Lamont. Both white and Latino interviewees drew sharper boundaries against those above and drew weaker boundaries against those below. And that is really, in a short time, a very startling reversal. So let me just make a couple more comments. So if I go back to that study that sort of generated the concern on my part to talk to not activists, not the kind of people who we see here in this room, but just what ordinary people out there who are not activists think about each other and class structure in America. Well, the hopeful part here is that what I've uncovered is really a less hostile boundary drawing. More support for multiculturalism, greater sense of similarity to each other, and difference from those above. The worm in the apple is that maybe this is due in part to sort of some unexpressed drawing of a comparison with African American workers. When people have suggested that to me before, that's a very hard thing to prove or disprove if it's unexpressed. But I will say that when our white workers were talking about criticizing those who are lazy in Lamont's book, they later on would identify those same workers as African Americans. In our study, in fact, they were criticizing other whites often. And there's big fear that the country is really in a bad state because white workers are not working hard enough. The more optimistic possibility, though, is that in California, the public debate since the failure of Proposition, Proposition 187 in 1994 it's totally changed it. We don't hear politicians saying anti-immigrant things there anymore. The whole public debate's different, and we may be seeing that on the ground. So, in answer to the panel questions, I think, yes, there are ongoing demographic changes that are creating new opportunities for building solidarity and challenging growing inequality. Thanks.
So we've got about 15 minutes, and we have, what? Oh, Richard Stolz is here. Rich, can you do a fast version of it? We've got about 15 minutes left, and we want to have some audience participation. So I'll just turn you over to the microphone.
Sure. So good afternoon. My name is Rich Stolz. I'm the Executive Director of One America, which is a statewide immigrant advocacy organization here. And one of the... talk right into it. Yeah, I'm just realizing that. And... So I apologize for being a little bit late. There are lots of things going on right now in the city of Seattle. But I did want to, actually it's maybe appropriate that I'm coming on after the last presentation. I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned over my years organizing at the national level in local communities in different parts of the country has been the importance of organizing and how easy it is for folks to forget what organizing actually is and how hard it is and why it gets overlooked. And I think one of the biggest critiques of the labor movement over the last couple of decades is there's not enough organizing. There's too much service delivery. And in community-based organizations, there's been too much emphasis on politics and mobilization and not leadership development. And I think there have been lots of different conversations along those lines that haven't quite met in between. And I think as an organization that focuses on organizing and advocacy and politics, we see tremendous opportunities on the near horizon. So if you look at the statistics about demographic change in this country and in Washington State, we know a few things. We know that by 2040, the United States will be a majority minority country. A lot of that's because of California. We also know in the state of Washington, while we won't be majority minority by 2040, we're going to be close. And King County almost certainly will be. One of the things that I've observed personally since coming to Washington State, I've been the director of One America for about a year and a half and here for about 3 years, has been there are some exciting and interesting experiments and projects and organizing efforts underway in Washington State that I think are worthy of some attention. When you think about the immigrant rights movement over the last couple of decades, it would have been true 20 years ago to say that one of the most significant obstacles to succeeding politically on immigration reform was the labor movement. And then, towards the end of the 1990s, there was significant shifting as there was growing recognition of demographic change and the fact that unions had to start organizing again. And there was a recognition around that same time, there was a pretty significant convention that the AFL had that made this decision that they would support comprehensive immigration reform and a pathway to citizenship. Now, I think it's true that not everyone in the labor movement necessarily views it the same way, but certainly labor leadership made a significant decision at that point in time. You know, it wasn't long after that that wonderful organizations, and I was working at one national organization watching the growth of an organization that I'm very fond of, the National Day Labor Organizing Network. And they organized day laborers. In fact, I think I see Hillary Stern at the back of the room, who's the executive director of Casa Latina. And I don't remember exactly when it happened, but there was a point in time where not only did the AFL embrace immigration reform as a policy, but they embraced Endelon as essentially a member in an associate status with the rest of the AFL labor movement. And here in Washington State, I think we're very unique in the fact that Casa Latina is actually a member of the Washington State Labor Council. And I just want to reflect for a moment on why that's significant. Because the day laborers themselves are not part of a union, but they're organizing. So what strikes me is that was groundbreaking. That's a big freaking deal. Not only because they accepted a predominantly Latino, low-income organization into their membership, but also because, most significantly, they began to think differently about what it means to be a member of a union, or what it means to be an organized worker, and what would be the mechanisms in which to build those connections. And the fact that Casa Latina is part of the Washington State Labor Council is a big deal. And I think it's a model for the rest of the country, and it's something we should be very proud of. Across the board, there are strategies emerging in organizations and across unions around the country exploring how do we learn from that experience? And that's the one I'm most familiar with. But how do we learn from that experience and think more broadly about worker rights and ways of organizing workers that bring all workers, wherever they're coming from, into the labor movement? Because the big issue isn't just about demographic change, but as Mark was saying, it's the fact that the labor movement has been losing steam for quite some time. Collective bargaining is harder than ever. But I think what has been exciting about the example of Endelon and the AFL and CASA and the Washington State Labor Council is that these new mechanisms are coming into focus, whether it's the Restaurant Opportunity Center and the work they're doing, organizing workers that aren't necessarily members of a union, but a worker association, or whether it's thinking more consciously about mechanisms in state or local law that can be used to organize workers, and if not as union members, but perhaps as associate members, or other strategies emerging from community organizations around figuring out, well, how do we create benefit-style organizations that start to look more like unions, but understanding we don't have collective bargaining rights. There are other things we can do, and there are other things we can do to organize and bring different kinds of benefits that are typically enjoyed by union members, but make them available to other kinds of workers in similar kinds of fights around working conditions, wages, access to benefits of various kinds. So I think in a lot of ways that body of work emerging in a very, I wouldn't say that it's not a coordinated strategy, but it's been very much in some ways both grassroots, thought leadership, just creativity, and coming to terms with changes in the labor market and what that means for, a growing number of low-wage workers in the context of greater income inequality and uncertainty about their ability to work their way up. That these opportunities, are just beginning to capture steam in really interesting, exciting ways. In our own example, I know other organizations are exploring similar strategies as well, but as we build our own political organization, One America Votes, that concept around attaching functional benefits that can help organize workers is very much on our radar screen as we think through, how do we build organizations that can be supported by workers that can be sustainable for longer periods of time and not be dependent upon the charity or even the strategic interests of unions and other kinds of organizations or foundations, but grounded in the support of members within communities. So with that, I'll stop and we'll see if there are more questions.